Hello, Wiley Universe. Thank you for joining. I am super excited to be talking to Dr. Ruth Link-Gellis. We actually met, I think, about a year ago at a conference. We were on a panel talking to students about potential career paths. I think Michael Mena was there too, actually. But Ruth has been the lead for vaccine effectiveness throughout the pandemic. And I noticed her name as author on these last few puzzle pieces of bivalent vaccines. So I reached out. I thought it would be worth bringing her on, not necessarily to talk about results, because I typed them in for you in this post, but really more of the context around those results. So I will stop talking. Welcome, Ruth. Can you just describe who you are and what you do at the CDC?
Sure. So I have a PhD in epidemiology. I've been at the CDC for over a decade, and I've been the vaccine effectiveness program lead for COVID-19 for about a year and a half now. I'm also the mom of a wonderful and very exhausting 4-year-old.
Yeah, sounds familiar. So historically, throughout the pandemic, the US hasn't really been able to evaluate vaccines very timely. In fact, especially in the beginning, we relied a lot on the UK and Israel to see how vaccines were doing, if we needed another vaccine, who did we need another vaccine for? And I've talked to Caitlin Rivers about this, but that was largely in part because they just have a national healthcare system. This is different, though. I don't know if you knew, Ruth, but last week the UK released their first results for vaccine effectiveness against severe disease. And this week the CDC is doing it. That's really only a 1-week delay. What changed in the past 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the different types of healthcare systems. Going into this, the UK and Israel, they had single payer or close to it healthcare systems, and we have a much more decentralized system. And so what that meant was that we needed to kind of build systems that could look at a patient who is hospitalized and correctly match them to their immunization history, which is how we calculate vaccine effectiveness. And so there were a lot of people working some very long days the last couple of years to try to build those systems and put them in place. And I think this time around, we're finally seeing the fruits of those labors pay off. And, we knew the bivalent vaccine was coming. And so we worked really hard at CDC to kind of get analyses put in place, think about how we would measure these, how we would talk to the public about them. And now we're finally here. And it is nice, I think, to be in this position where we actually have some data from the US as kind of first out of the gate and can understand how the vaccine is working here for our country.
Surprised, no offense, but I was surprised. I thought it was going to be coming later in the spring, because also that's kind of when we see the vaccine effectiveness of the flu. It's usually not this quick. So yeah, it was a nice surprise, especially when we're about to gather with holidays, but we'll get into that in a little. So the bottom line results from at least these papers is that the bivalent vaccine, this fall booster, reduces severe disease by X amount, between 50 and 80%. Given what you just said about how you guys kind of had to copy and paste all these fragmented systems together, how confident are you in these numbers, and why or why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are still a lot of unanswered questions. For example, we don't know about waning, how long the protection will last, and the science changes, of course. And so what we've done with COVID and what we'll continue to do is monitor over time. We know that there's a COVID surge that's kind of percolating right now. And so I think it's likely that we'll see updates to these numbers sometime in early to mid-spring. I think I have confidence, certainly in the data systems and the people doing the analyses. And I think you'll see in these studies that there's kind of a wider range of estimates across the two studies and by time since vaccination, but they both tell the same story, which is really important and matches what we saw a couple weeks ago from the infection data, which is that these vaccines provide pretty substantial additional protection, especially especially if it's been a long time since you got your last monovalent dose. And we know in this country that there are a lot of people that are a year or more out from their last dose. And so they've had some waning of protection. And so they're not as protected going into this winter season. And both of these papers, along with the infection data that we published a couple of weeks ago, show that this bivalent vaccine will give you added protection.
Were you surprised about the results, about how high they were or how low they were?
I don't think I was surprised. Reassured is probably a better word for it. You know, we had the early estimates of vaccine effectiveness against symptomatic infection that were published around Thanksgiving. And those showed protection around 50% against symptomatic infection. We know from the older vaccines that protection against more severe disease is almost always higher. And that's expected based on what we know from other vaccines and generally how the body works and how the immune system responds to vaccines. So based on what we saw a couple of weeks ago, we were expecting and hoping that the numbers for severe disease for hospitalization would be higher. And that's been confirmed, which I think is really reassuring.
Right. The problem is it's only reassuring if people get vaccines in arms, right? Vaccinations is different than vaccines in vials. Why do you think that only 12% of the US population has a bivalent booster? I think it's 12% lately.
Yeah, I know there's about 150 million Americans that are eligible for a bivalent booster and haven't gotten it yet. I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Certainly we're seeing less hospitalization, less severe disease, less people dying of COVID than we were seeing this time last year. And so I think people are a little bit fatigued from COVID, understandably.
A little.
I'm pretty sick of COVID myself. And I think, we know that annual flu vaccine rates are not great in this country, and there's a lot of work to be done to increase those. So I don't think it's surprising to see that people have been a little slow to take up these vaccines. But there's no time like the present. And with holiday travel coming up, a lot of people are going to be seeing friends and family indoors that they haven't seen in a long time. It's a great time to get your vaccine.
So have you gotten your vaccine yet? Your fall booster?
I did, yes. My family is up to date.
And why? So I know that's a loaded question, but you are younger, I am younger. Our risks of severe disease really aren't that substantial compared to, for example, older populations. What were you thinking? What was your thinking process of getting that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's one that I get a lot. There are a couple of things that went into it for me and for my husband. The first is that, we talk about risk at a population level generally. So yes, young, healthy adults in our age group are not at super high risk of severe disease, but the risk is not nothing. And at a population level, maybe we're not, but we can't predict at an individual level who's actually going to get really sick with COVID. And there certainly have been young, healthy adults that have been hospitalized and have died of COVID. And the vaccine is safe, and it's relatively few adverse events, relatively few side effects. I tend to get a sore arm and the shivers for a couple of hours, but I mean, that's so much better than being hospitalized. So I'm happy to do anything that would cut that risk. The other thing that played into it for me and my husband was that I'll be traveling with my 4-year-old next week. We'll be staying with my elderly parents. We'll be going to Hanukkah parties with their friends. And the vaccine, we know from a couple of weeks ago, does provide some protection against symptomatic infection, which means that me being recently vaccinated provides my parents and their friends with extra protection. So I think all of those things figured into it, both decreasing my personal risk of hospitalization and decreasing the risk that I would get someone else sick.
So you have a 4-year-old, bless your heart. I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. Bivalent vaccines are now out for them. I honestly, as a mom, I'm kind of struggling when to get them that bivalent vaccine. What's your thought process behind that?
Yeah, so my daughter received the 3 Pfizer doses, so she's
not
currently
eligible.
eligible for a bivalent vaccine. But to families that got the Moderna or are waiting, I think there's no time like the present, as I said earlier. If they're, we're seeing the beginnings of a surge in COVID in this country right now, that is likely to get worse with all of the holiday travel and sort of indoor parties and things that people are going to go to. And, if you wait and get a vaccine in April and the COVID surge was in December, that vaccine in April is not going to help you. So you might as well get it now before you travel, before you gather with family and friends.
Okay, I will schedule an appointment. You just convinced me. So last question for you. You already kind of mentioned it, but we're going to be seeing grandparents next week, right? Christmas is around the corner. New Year's is around the corner. Hanukkah starts on the 18th this year, I think. So very soon. What do you tell parents and grandparents? Pretend you're just talking to a grandparent that haven't had the fall booster yet. How do we get them to get the fall booster?
Yeah, I mean, again, no time like the present. I think, one thing that I hear a lot is people are worried about side effects. They're worried, they don't want to have a fever over the holidays or things like that from the vaccine. Get it today, get it tomorrow. You'll be well over those, couple of days where you might feel a little under the weather, especially for a grandparent. I mean, I don't know about you, but my daughter missed so much time with her grandparents these last couple of years. And the idea that one of them would not get the bivalent booster and therefore end up sick and my daughter would lose more time with them is heartbreaking to me. And I've had this conversation with my parents. Both of them went out and got vaccinated immediately when they were eligible. And I'm so thankful for that. I would never forgive myself, I think, if I didn't sit them down and kind of explain to them why I felt like it was important. There are 28 million Americans over the age of 65 that have not gotten their bivalent booster yet. And we know that the vaccine effectiveness in that age group is quite high. One of the papers on Friday shows that vaccine effectiveness in that group for the bivalent vaccine against hospitalization is 70 to 80%. That is great protection. That will really lower a person's risk of ending up in the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when we start talking about, 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds, sometimes they may need help finding like how, where is the closest vaccine? Can you drive them to go get that vaccine? I mean, just the logistics behind it can also be incredibly confusing. And I think that would also kind of help push them through the door too. But Ruth, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for taking the time to chat. Appreciate all that you do and happy holidays.
Thanks. I'm so happy to talk to you. Happy holidays yourself.